Homelander is dead. Butcher is dead. The Boys, as a show, is officially finished after 5 seasons and 7 years on Prime Video. And yet somehow, this franchise is nowhere close to being over. Today we're breaking down why The Boys finale split its own fan base right down the middle, why one of its spin-offs already got the axe, and why the next chapter of this universe is about to hand the keys over to a completely different character. Not Homelander, not Butcher, a guy who spent most of this final season flirting with celebrities from the 1940s and bonding with his estranged son. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about how this thing actually ended, because the internet has not agreed on this in weeks. The Boys Season 5 wrapped up on Prime Video in May of 2026, closing out Billy Butcher's arc, Homelander's reign, and basically every plot thread this show has been building since 2019. On paper, the finale delivered exactly what fans wanted for years. Butcher beats a depowered Homelander to death. That's the moment this entire series have been building towards since Season 1. And creator Eric Kripke has said flat out that Butcher killing Homelander with a crowbar was always the plan from day one. But here's where it gets messy. Critics love this season. Rotten Tomatoes has the critic score sitting at 93%, with reviewers praising the performances, the satire, and the way the show stuck the landing on its central conflict. The audience score tells a completely different story. It dropped into the low 50s after the finale aired, which is one of the steepest audience collapses Rotten Tomatoes has recorded for a final season. That's Game of Thrones territory. That's the kind of gap where critics are calling it a triumphant ending and half the fan base is calling it one of the worst episodes of television they've ever sat through. So what actually went wrong for viewers? A few things kept coming up. Fans felt there was no threat that matched the stakes of a series finale. The final fights were seen as underwhelming. And a lot of people felt Butcher gave up on his soup-killing mission far too easily after building it up for an entire season. On the other side, plenty of viewers appreciated smaller character moments, like Mother's Milk finally getting a real resolution, or the quieter, more grounded way some relationships wrapped up. This is a franchise that has always been extremely online, so it's worth remembering that the loudest reactions are not always the majority opinion. Even with all that backlash, Season 5 still broke Prime Video viewership records, pulling in over 57 million viewers in its first 39 days. People were furious, and they still could not stop watching. Now, one more casualty from all this. Gen V, the college spinoff following young soups at Godalkin University, has been canceled after 2 seasons. That one stings a bit more because Gen V was genuinely well reviewed, and it was supposed to feed directly into this final season of The Boys. Instead, most of the Gen V cast barely showed up in the finale, and characters that were billed up as major threats basically did nothing when it counted. It's a strange outcome for a shared universe that spent years telling us everything was connected. So that's the ending. Messy, divisive, but still record-breaking. Now let's talk about what's actually coming next, because this is where things get interesting. In 2027, Prime Video is launching Vought Rising, and this is not a small side project. This is a full prequel series set in the 1950s, built around the origins of Vought International itself, the corporation behind every superpower disaster this franchise has ever shown us. The premise is being described as a twisted murder mystery, following the earliest days of Soldier Boy and a character named Clara Vought, who fans of the main show will already know by a very different name. Stormfront. Jensen Ackles and Aya Cash are both returning to lead the series, and both are also producing it. That matters. This isn't just 2 actors reprising roles for a paycheck. They're actually shaping the direction of this project behind scenes. Paul Grelong, who's been a writer and producer on the Mothership show, is stepping in as showrunner, with Eric Kripke and the usual team of executive producers, including Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, still very much involved. Here's something worth flagging. Production on Vought Rising actually wrapped before The Boys Season 5 even started airing. Filming ran from August of 2025 through March of 2026. According to Jensen Ackles himself, speaking to press around the finale, the first season is already shot and currently being edited, and he said the goal is for it to premiere early in the year, which points toward a spring 2027 release rather than the usual summer window this franchise normally uses. And there's a reason Soldier Boy kept showing up so much in this final season, even when fans complained it was eating up screen time that should have gone to the core cast. All that talk about honoring what Clara wanted, all that bonding between Soldier Boy and Homelander, all of it was table setting. The final season was quietly functioning as a marketing campaign for Vought Rising, whether audiences realized it in the moment or not. Now here's the bigger structural shift, and this is the part one actually find fascinating from a storytelling angle. 4 or 5 seasons, this entire franchise has orbited around one character. Homelander. Anthony Starr has carried this show, giving one of the more layered supervillain performances on television, arguably better than the writing he was sometimes given. But once Vought Rising premieres, Soldier Boy officially becomes the new central figure of this universe. Not a side character anymore, the lead. And honestly, you could argue that shift already happened during Season 5. Go back and look at how screen time was distributed in this final run. Frenchie's death happens and barely gets room to breathe. Mother's Milk gets sidelined for most of the season. Kimiko's material leans heavily on crude humor instead of meaningful development. Annie gets the bare minimum in terms of an actual arc. Meanwhile, Soldier Boy gets extended scenes reconnecting with a son he abandoned, catching up with old friends, and rattling off a list of mid-century celebrities he supposedly slept with. That's not incidental. That's a franchise quietly reallocating its attention toward the character its next show depends on. This is honestly the perfect encapsulation of what makes the boys frustrating and fascinating at the same time. Soldier Boy is, in a lot of ways, the character who represents everything this franchise does well and everything it stumbles on. When a show uses him for satire and for exploring what a genuinely traumatized, narcissistic old-school hero looks like decades later, he's compelling. When a show leans on him for shock value or juvenile one-liners, he becomes exactly the kind of self-indulgent humor this franchise sometimes mistakes for edge. Let's zoom out for a second, because there's a bigger pattern here that's worth talking about. We are watching a satire about corporate greed and manufactured superheroes slowly turn into its own cinematic universe, complete with prequels, spin-offs, and a release calendar. The boys spent years mocking Marvel and DC for exactly this kind of franchise expansion, and now it's doing the same thing. The difference, at least so far, is that this universe has actually delivered. Gen V, before its cancellation, was a genuinely strong show in its own right. The animated anthology, Diabolical, held up. This franchise has, until now, avoided the trap that a lot of shared universes fall into, where half the spin-offs feel like filler content nobody asked for. Whether that streak continues is entirely on Vought Rising's shoulders now. There's already a bit of a safety net here, because Amazon confirmed there's a second Boys Universe spin-off in development, this one set in Mexico, with a different creative team attached. So even if Vought Rising stumbles, the franchise has a backup plan. But if Vought Rising wants to actually earn multiple seasons, which Ackles has said is the intention, it needs to avoid the exact trap that hurt this final season. Don't let Soldier Boy's screen time come at the expense of everyone else's story. Except this time, there is no one else. He is the story, which honestly removes one of the biggest structural problems Season 5 had. There's no ensemble to compete with for runtime. So here's where this leaves us. The Boys ends divisively, but profitably. Gen V is gone, and Vought Rising is stepping up as the flagship of this universe, built entirely around the character who arguably already stole the spotlight before he even got his own show. Whether a 1950s corporate murder mystery about the birth of Vought can carry an entire franchise on its own is genuinely one of the more interesting bets Prime Video is making in 2027. I want to know what you think. Do you think this final season deserved the backlash it got? Or is this another case of online reaction being louder than the actual audience? And more importantly, are you actually excited for a Soldier Boy-led prequel? Or does this feel like the franchise leaning on its most divisive character instead of building something new? Drop your take in the comments. I read all of them. If you want more breakdowns like this the moment new details drop, subscribe, because this franchise clearly isn't done making headlines. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.